Welcome to another guest interview. I have today with me Glen Mansbridge, who owns a company called Technology Tamed, and he is an expert in GDPR, especially for practices. He designed a fantastic GDPR toolkit when the new GDPR laws came into place, and it has been really, really well received. So I thought it would be a great idea to invite Glen to let's just kind of relook at GDPR, but also look at kind of general IT questions that come up. So Glen, thank you very much for joining me, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So maybe let's start with a bit of an intro from you, and how did Technology Tamed come about, and what's your main focus?
Okay, thank you. And first of all, thank you, Celia, for inviting me today to take part in this little chat with everyone there. So Technology Tamed, I started that in 1996 because I was aware at the time that if you were big businesses, you had IT departments that could take care of all your IT needs. If you had a problem, you picked up the phone, you spoke to somebody in IT, and then as if by magic, hopefully your problems were sorted. But for small businesses, there wasn't really that service available. You could go to the likes of PC World or other shops, but really their focus was to sell you kit. They really wanted to sell you computers, printers, software. They weren't really interested in helping you make better use of your technology. So that's why Technology Tamed came about. It was seeing that need for small businesses and the fact that they really needed help to make their technology work for them, hence taming the technology. Um, Now, even before Technology Tamed came about, I got involved with clinics because I was commissioned by the owner and developer of a clinic management product called Healthy Practice to write its first user manual. So having written that, I was then asked to also go and visit clinics to install the Healthy Practice product, to do training, to provide ongoing support, and then from there got actively involved also in the development of it. That relationship has very much endured over the past 25 years or so, and in fact, we're now Technology Tamed is now the owners of Healthy Practice, so it's now our
Yeah,
sort of baby, as it were.
yeah.
So that sort of sets the scene in terms of how the sort of technology role moves across and into the clinic role as well.
Yeah, great. And so, and then you ventured into GDPR.
Indeed.
So, oh, and we've got a visitor here. Hello, kitty
Oh,
cat.
my apologies. Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes, the cat's always very curious when I'm here
That's
doing Zoom
okay.
meetings.
Absolutely fine. I've met cats and dogs and babies and husbands and all sorts of people and animals on Zoom. So tell me about GDPR in a nutshell.
Okay, well, I can summarize GDPR in literally just one sentence. It's a set
Wow.
of requirements to ensure that a business is handling personal data in a responsible and safe way. And before GDPR came along, my observation is that most businesses and certainly clinics gave very little thought to that. I
Mm,
remember visiting many clinics with my sort of healthy practice head cap on and noticing, for example, that there was filing cabinets that were unlocked, full of patient files,
mm,
kept in all sorts of strange places, including the patient toilets, and nobody really worried about that too much.
mm,
Or in their treatment rooms, there'd be stacks of the patient treatment notes sitting on the side there waiting for the clinic session to start.
mm.
So really, GDPR is all about focusing businesses and clinics on the fact that you're handling people's personal data.
Yeah. And so how did you actually come to get involved in kind of creating that very comprehensive GDPR toolkit?
Well, it all started, I remember this very vividly. I was actually out visiting a clinic to install and train on healthy practice. And this goes back to sort of August, September 2017. And they, while I was there, I got a phone call from the Scottish Chiropractic Association. And they said, oh, we've got to try and help our members get compliant with GDPR.
Mm,
Can you help? Because they were aware of my sort of technology expertise and so forth. And when I looked into it, I realized that what was really on offer, not just for clinics, but generally for businesses, was seminars. Go and
Mm.
attend a seminar for a couple of hours, and then that's it. And I thought, but that's really not going to help, because GDPR is not about ticking a box to say I've been on a course, it's about compliance.
Mm.
And in order to comply, you have to go through a compliance process. And I thought, well, the best way to do that is to provide the toolkit to sort of guide clinics through that step by step so that they can reach that end goal. Having realised that that's what I was going to offer, I also then contacted obviously yourself, Celia, and
Yeah.
also the BCA and the IO, to see whether they would also be interested in helping their members in that way.
Yeah. And so that was created, well, quite a while ago now, over 3 years ago now. Is it still relevant for our clients to go through that process if they haven't already?
Well, it's not only is it relevant, it's also a legal requirement. GDPR was incorporated into the Data Protection Act in 2018. And again, it's not about a one-time attend a course, tick a box, get a certificate, I'm
Mm.
done. It's all about ongoing compliance. So certainly any business or clinic that is yet to go through that compliance process, I would certainly urge them to do so.
Yeah, and we've got new clinics starting all the time, so that toolkit's still available. Have there been any changes to the GDPR rulings since April 2018?
Effectively, none. I think there was a lot of anticipation that, oh, some of these things, once it's in place, they'll just be dropped. And the answer is no, because
Mm.
all of those requirements were brought into that Data Protection Act. And really, unless there's something that's taken through the courts to challenge any of the rules won't be changed. And certainly
Okay.
in the context of GDPR for clinics and small business, that certainly hasn't happened yet.
Okay. And has leaving the EU had any impact?
I've had quite a few queries
Had
on
to ask
that,
that.
as you can probably
I'm not
imagine.
surprised.
I think a lot of people were hopeful that, oh, we leave the EU and therefore this will all be abandoned. Well, the Information Commission Office made it absolutely clear leading up to Brexit that all this legislation was going to remain absolutely after Brexit. And indeed, that's a good thing because
Mm.
we live in a very connected world. And I'm sure many of the clinics here are using products and services that are not based in the UK, but are based in the EU.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
had the UK decided they were going to drop a lot of the legislation, that would have actually caused a lot of problems for UK businesses.
Mm.
So it's a good
Yeah.
thing that we've kept all the rules.
Okay. And have there been any fines issued? And what was a breach that the fines were issued for?
I, as preparation for today's little session, I did go onto the ICO website to see what the latest sort of figures were. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I've got 4 examples here of fines that have been issued since
Mhm.
GDPR came into force. So the first one was a company called Doorstep Dispensary Limited, and they were fined £275,000 because they left 500,000 documents in unlocked containers at the rear of their premises. And those documents contained personal data.
Mm. Yeah. Wow.
Moving on to the next one, DSG Retail, so that's the sort of Dixon's group that includes Currys and PC World.
Mhm.
They were fined £500,000 after their point of sale system, so their sort of till system in the shops and
Mm.
everything, was compromised by a cyber attack. And as a result, that affected 14 million people with their personal details.
Wow.
So you could say, well, they got hit by a cyber attack. It
Mm.
wasn't really their fault. But clearly, when it was investigated, they were found wanting in terms of their data protection and were fined
Mm.
accordingly.
Yeah.
Then we move on to British Airways, and they were fined £20 million after failing to protect personal and financial data for its 400,000 customers.
Mm.
Then we have Marriott International, and they were fined £18.4 million for
Mm.
failing to keep customers' personal data secure. Now, those last two examples demonstrate one of the aspects of the new Data Protection Act and GDPR. Prior to that, the maximum fine that could be levied was £500,000. Now with GDPR, it is up to 4% of the company's worldwide turnover,
Right.
or I think it's £20 million, whichever is the higher.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, the ICO has the real teeth to levy huge fines against
Mm.
companies that run roughshod over the legislation.
Yeah. And were there any kind of smaller company examples? So, those are all quite sizable businesses, aren't they?
Yes, but the ICO would recognise that for smaller businesses, that often the data breach is of a small nature. Most small
Mm.
businesses don't have data of millions of customers in their systems
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sometimes the nature of data breach is something that is minor in nature, and the effect on the personal data is relatively minor. So
Right.
in each case of a data breach, and I'll give you a real life example shortly, the ICO will look at that breach in terms of, was it easily preventable? Was the business negligent in allowing that data to be breached? So certainly
Mm.
that first example I gave, clearly just leaving 500,000 documents
Yeah.
in unlocked containers in insecure premises,
Mm.
well, that was clearly grossly negligent.
Mm.
If a business or clinic can be seen to be doing the right thing, i.e., they've complied with GDPR as much as they can, they're following all the rules, and yet even so there's been a data breach, the ICO would look on that much more favourably
Mm.
than a business or clinic that's just ignored it
Not bothered.
and carried on, not bothered. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are the key areas that you have seen neglected or overlooked by clinic owners?
Mm. Well, there's
Mhm.
three key areas that I have seen or I've been in discussion with various clinics. So the first of those is failing to keep their data records up to date. So for those clinics that have already gone through the toolkit, you'll recall that there's a requirement for keeping logs when patients ask for a copy of their personal data.
Mhm.
In GDPR terminology, that's called a data subject access request. So there's clinics that aren't actually recording when those requests are made and recording that those requests have been handled in the correct way. There's data erasure records. So again, part of the legislation says that if you are removing or deleting personal data, then you need to keep a record of that, the fact that that data has been removed. Secondly, not revisiting GDPR on a regular basis to review your procedures and your policies. So, everyone was frantically back in 2018 trying to get compliant and rushing through, getting all this done, following the toolkit. And I think that most people breathed a huge sigh of relief at the end of that process, put it in a cupboard and thought, that's done. Well,
Yeah.
that is not what GDPR is about. It's about maintaining ongoing compliance.
Mm.
So every clinic needs to factor in maybe annually or or 6 monthly, just saying, right, okay, let's revisit this toolkit. Let's revisit those procedures. Let's revisit
Mm.
our policies. Are they still valid? Are we still following the same steps? Because if we
Mm.
don't, we may no longer be in compliance.
Yeah.
And thirdly, one, probably the biggest one, is not conducting a data protection impact assessment. And again, that was part of the toolkit. Whenever
Mm.
you are about to implement a new system that involves personal data, it is a requirement of GDPR to conduct this data protection impact assessment. And that's to make sure that when you are processing, handling, storing, working with that personal data in that new system, you're doing it in a way that protects that data. And probably the
Yeah.
biggest example there is where clinics move from one clinic management system to another. So
Mm.
maybe they've been using, I don't know, Clinico for some time. Now they've decided that JNAP or Healthy Practicing is a better system for their needs. Well, before they jump ship and move to another system, they need to be doing a DPIA. And I don't think many
Yeah.
clinics are formally doing that.
Mm. Yeah, I bet you're right. I'm kind of thinking of the clinics that I know, especially during lockdown. Loads of practices changed from one system to another. So I'm kind of in the back of my mind thinking, I must just kind of make sure that they've done that.
Indeed, and a lot of
Yeah.
clinics during that lockdown again went from having no clinic management system to
Yes.
bringing one in because they
Yeah.
realised that running with a purely manual system was no longer viable
Mm.
when everything was done at such a distance. So again,
Yeah.
there they should have all been doing these DPIAs.
Yeah. And bringing in, like new technology like Zoom, and to do client sessions over Zoom and all that kind of thing as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Mm.
And it's been a
Yeah.
wonderful opportunity for clinics to look at their entire processes and then
Yeah.
introduce the technology to just make those processes work better, given the
Yeah.
fact that they had to work in a new way.
Mm. Hmm. And a question one of my master members asked was, how much detail does your website privacy policy have to have?
Okay. And that is a really, really good question because it all depends on what personal data is being collected through the website and the
Hmm.
purposes for it. So let's take a very simple example. Your website has a contact form so that a patient can put in their name and maybe their phone number and email address because they want to know more about the clinic and what it does and its services. Then basically, on that web link to that website, there needs to be a privacy policy that explains how long that data is going to be held and the purposes to which it's going to be used, whether it's going to be shared with any third parties, and the rights that that person submitting that data has to see a copy of that data, have it removed if it's no longer valid, and also the lawful basis under which that data is being collected. And again, those that have gone through the GDPR process and the toolkit will recall that when handling personal data, you have to identify what lawful basis are you using? Is it consent? Is it contract? Is it legitimate interest? And so forth. So you need to be aware and comfortable with, well, in this case, it's consent perhaps, because they are freely giving their consent to share their data with you for this purpose. But don't forget that privacy policies go beyond just your website. So you need to have a privacy policy for the data that you're holding on your actual patients because you are storing their data in your clinic management system, for example, or other platforms. And again, that will be subject to data retention policies, right of access, and all sorts. That needs to be a privacy policy. Your
Yeah.
staff, you've got data on your staff, on your reception staff, and other people in your clinic,
Mm.
and that needs to be communicated through privacy policies.
Okay. And so once we've gone through the whole GDPR toolkit and everything's implemented, what are the ongoing? So I know you've kind of said it needs to be reviewed and things, but are there any other ongoing requirements to remain compliant?
Well, you basically a clinic has to comply with all aspects of GDPR. So
Mm.
really, everything that was communicated through the toolkit, in terms of keeping the logs, looking at your data protection, doing your data protection impact assessments, making sure you've got processor contracts in place, all of that is a requirement to be doing on an ongoing basis, which is why
Yeah.
conducting maybe at least an annual audit of GDPR is such a good idea to make
Yeah.
sure that none of those processes have lapsed.
Mm. Yeah. Great. And then what is the legal requirement for deleting or destroying patient data?
I get asked that a lot because there's this misconception that somewhere there is in law, in GDPR, it says you must destroy patient data after a number of years. And in fact, there is nothing in the legislation that mentions any timescale at all. Now, when I was in the early stages of compiling the toolkit, there was much discussion about this subject because clinics wanted to know, well, do I need to keep
Mm.
my data for 7 years, 5 years, and so on? And I was in discussion with the BCA, and they wanted to sort of almost mandate their members to say 7 years. And that was
Mhm.
based on something that was mentioned in the GCC guidance, and that itself came from some guidelines that were published from the NHS many years ago.
Mm.
But a lot of the clinics I spoke to said, but even if I've not seen a patient for 7 years, if they return for treatment, I want to be able to go back to the treatment notes that were recorded when I saw them 10, 15 years ago
Mm.
to
Yeah.
remind myself what I treated them for and how I did it. And they said, so can we no longer do it? And I explained to them, well, yeah, as long as your retention policy says we're going to keep it indefinitely unless a patient specifically asks us after 7 years to remove it, that's absolutely fine. Other clinics said, well, that patient data has a value to my clinic. And when it comes time to maybe sell my clinic, I want to be able to present that as a tangible asset to my business.
Mm.
And again, there's no problem with that. GDPR does not say that you cannot do that. So it's up for a clinic
Okay.
to decide, but they
Yeah.
need to make that clear in their retention policies.
Great. So I know we alluded to this a little while ago, but some of my clients using a particular practice management software system have had a recent data breach industry issue. What is a process for dealing with a data breach?
Okay, so that particular CRM product was a product called Practice Hub. And I became aware of it because I'm a data protection officer for one of the clinics that uses their system. So the clinic principal contacted me and explained that they'd been notified by Practice Hub that there'd been a data breach. And in fact, what happened was the actual database wasn't breached, it wasn't compromised, but the external files associated with some of that data, so uploaded GP letters, uploaded scans, in the case of this particular clinic, there was about 300 of those that were removed from this server. Now, Practice Hub, it wasn't their server. They were using Amazon Web Services to host their system. And it was basically the security of the Amazon Web Server that was compromised. So it wasn't just affecting this one clinic, it was affecting lots of clinics using the Practice Hub system, and indeed lots of other businesses using this particular Amazon Web Server. So Practice Hub did absolutely the right thing. As soon as they were notified or they identified a data breach, they reported that to the ICO. Separately, as I'm the data protection officer for this particular clinic, I also reported it to the ICO, giving details of what we'd discovered, how many records have been affected, and the actions that the clinic was taking. So I advised the clinic to contact by letter and by email each of the patients whose data they know to have been removed from the server, and explaining what happened and what was being done. Now, that is the process. That is absolutely the correct process to take. The ICO have not come back to me to say, well, this isn't good enough or anything. And indeed, the process is being followed. So I think as far as the ICO is concerned, data breaches happen. It's not probably through negligence. We'll wait to hear, obviously, from Amazon's point of view, how they think that happened and what they're going to do about it.
So watch the space.
Yes, absolutely. Watch this.
Yeah. So one of the key topics that clinic owners are really concerned about is communicating to their client base. Can you explain the difference between patient journey communication, so kind of around about their care, and marketing, and then the legal requirements around the two?
Absolutely. There was a lot of, again, misinformation during the time of GDPR about not being able to communicate with people. Now, I listened to a Radio 4 Moneybox article way back in about April 2018, where somebody from the ICO was being quizzed about exactly this. So does this mean that as a clinic, I can no longer communicate with my patients unless I have explicit permission to do so? And the ICO said, absolutely, that's not the case. And even for marketing, that is not the case, because you have a relationship with your patients. And as such, you can market your goods and services to those patients without them opting in first. You should, however, give them an opt-out. So let's say, for example, as a clinic, you're using MailChimp or Sendinblue to send out your communications. That is absolutely fine, and you don't need prior permission from your patients to do so, but you do need to include that important opt-out option so they can choose not to receive any more. You also must ensure that those communications are relevant to what you do as a clinic. So, for example, you couldn't suddenly take your MailChimp mailing list and decide that you're going to market to those patients your spouse's car cleaning business or your partner's dog walking business, because they are not relevant to your business. But other than that, you're absolutely free to do so. So
Wow,
again, sorry.
That's really, I think there's been so much kind of misconception around that, and so many conversations that people are just not sending out any communication because they don't have the opt-ins. And I mean, I remember having a conversation with you ages ago about my situation as well, because we had all these, we had consent from everybody that attended our workshops on pieces of paper that were then tossed way before GDPR came in. And suddenly I've got this database with no real opt-ins.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I
And
was
again,
relieved that you said I can do it.
no, absolutely. And also, again, at the time of getting compliance, I was obviously helping, as you know, many clinics through the toolkit and so on. And I remember one particular clinic said, so they had arranged for a printer to get printed off 20,000 consent sheets so that they could get consent from every patient to be able to contact them, to tell them about their appointments, to be able to send them receipts. And I said, ring up the printer now and cancel that order. You do not need to do it.
Yeah.
So yes, there was a lot of misconception, and I've listened in on some other seminars that were taking place, and the people were just giving wrong information, and particularly marketing people were just scaring the living daylights of everyone about, oh no, you can't now talk to anyone unless they contact you first and give you consent, and that is not correct.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that kind of leads into that kind of next question that I had, was that the fact that I still get loads of unsolicited emails, and often have to opt out rather than, so like when you're purchasing online, you have to opt out rather than opting in. What do you think the risk of a practice marketing to their database is? Well, I mean, you just said that they're allowed to, so there is no risk in them marketing to their database. What about if they're marketing to other people that they have not had any contact with?
Okay, so that is a little bit more problematical. Now, you can use the lawful basis of legitimate interest, and that is why everyone is still getting bombarded with emails where you're thinking, well, I didn't sign up for that. But
Yeah.
if you actually read the privacy policies, how many people do that? But if you actually was to delve down into their privacy policies, you would probably find that a lot of their lawful bases are legitimate interest, where a company has purchased maybe a mailing list and they believe it's in their legitimate interest to tell you about their product because that list has been compiled based on the industry that you're in. So a good example for clinics would be where you're getting unsolicited emails from companies selling ice packs. You've had no prior contact with them, but an ice pack company or retailer has purchased a list of 20,000 clinics in the UK, and they're using legitimate interest to do so. I would also just caution that if you have, say, a contact form on your website, that if you want to be able to use those details for marketing, you include a tick box opt-in on that contact form. If you don't, you cannot contact those patients really with marketing information because
because they're not patients yet, if they're not the
exactly,
clinic's patients yet.
absolutely, they're inquiries at that stage.
Yeah.
So I would always either change the name of that form to say it's a consent and marketing opt-in form. So when they're providing their details, it's clear to them they are
Yeah.
providing those to Optin to marketing, or even
Mm.
better is to have a tick box at the bottom that says, yeah, please send me your clinic newsletters and other
Yeah.
marketing
Okay.
information.
So to be clear, if a clinic has a patient on their books that is a patient of theirs, whether they are a current patient or a former patient, they are allowed to communicate with that patient. They are allowed to market their services to that patient, but they need to give an opt out in case a patient doesn't want to receive that information anymore.
That is absolutely correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that is going to be music to so many people's ears, because I still have conversations where they're saying, oh, but I really don't want, I'm worried about this because I haven't got the permission and they haven't ticked the box. And so I think that's going to be real music to their ears.
Yeah.
Right. So let's move away from GDPR and let's just talk general IT. So what are the main IT issues that you support practitioners with?
Okay, so in addition to the healthy practice product that we obviously sell and support, we often
Mm.
get asked to get involved in other IT issues. Now, for some local clinics, we support their IT as we do any other business customer. For other ones that are a bit further away, we can provide remote support for particular issues. And those tend to fall into the following areas. First of all, their computer is really slow, so performance issues.
Mm.
And generally, an hour's remote housekeeping can actually do quite a lot to solve performance issues.
Mm.
Other times, it's a case that the computer is just too old and too slow to really make much difference.
Mm.
Email issues. So either they can't send or receive emails, or they've got concerns with lots of spam emails or other things of that nature. Printing. Bearing in mind that printing has been a fundamental part of computing for the last sort of 40 years, it's amazing how many basic printing issues can still arise on a day-to-day basis. Internet performance, but sometimes it's not so much internet performance as wireless performance, and sometimes those two get a bit muddled in people's heads. So
Mm.
they'll contact us and say, oh, can you remote in? Our internet's really slow. And when we do so, we find, well, the speed of their internet connection to the outside world's fine. It's the internal wireless communication that's the bottleneck, and that's
Mm.
the cause. And then finally, we get a lot of involvement with dealing with viruses and malware on computers, which
Mm.
can have a knock-on effect in all those other areas. So if a computer gets infected with malware, that can slow it right down. It can
Mm.
affect its internet performance. It can even affect things like printing and email. So
Yeah.
those are the key areas.
Okay. And what are your recommendations on security and storage?
Okay, so I'm actually going to split those into two
Yeah.
distinct questions, really.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so for security, the absolute basic is for your computers in your clinic, make sure you've got passwords for logons.
Mm.
So somebody just can't wander up to the computer, wiggle a mouse, and hey presto, they've got access to your files, maybe
Mm.
access into your practice management software, and so forth. Good quality antivirus software. Um, it's amazing how many computers I deal with now that still nobody wants to pay the £30 a year for business quality supported antivirus software. They've either got
Mm.
some free product that actually expired 3 years ago, or a trial version that's expired, or indeed nothing at all.
Yeah.
There's also a bit of a myth that if you use an Apple Mac, it can't get infected. So people think that Apple Macs don't need protection. That's not strictly true. Although Apple Macs are far better protected from viruses, that doesn't necessarily make them immune. So if you're using an Apple Mac product like an iMac or a MacBook, also consider some protection for those as well.
Mm.
For cloud-based systems, again, I think this is often overlooked with cloud-based practice management software. If you have staff that leave, change passwords,
Mm.
and certainly disable their user accounts. And I think sometimes that's just overlooked. And of
Yeah.
course, those staff, maybe a practitioner or an associate that's now left, they might still have access to your system. And not only is
Yeah.
that poor security, that's in breach of GDPR, because
Mm.
they are no longer a processor in your clinic because they've left, yet
Mm.
they've got access to your data.
Yeah.
For storage, it very much depends on the requirements of the clinic. So we've got some clinics that very much they store data locally. So they've got, documents stored locally on their computers. Their clinic management product may be local, so their database is local. If it's stored locally, make sure you've got reliable backups.
Mm.
Not only make sure you've got a backup in place, that there is a procedure to check that it's actually working. And
Yeah.
over the years, I've dealt with so many clinics where they've suffered some catastrophic computer failure, the hard disk has failed, and they said, well, that's fine, we've got a backup. And when we checked, it's not worked for 18 months.
Mm.
But nobody was actually taken through the process for checking that that's happened.
Yeah.
Now, third-party backup software can give you that reassurance because it can send you a log, or it can send you an email that gives you
Mm.
that confidence that it's done. For cloud storage, then generally that backup is all done for you, but make sure that that process is again compliant with GDPR. You
Mm.
don't want your cloud data, for example, being stored on a server somewhere in North Korea, because, not surprisingly, that is outside the sort of areas that are protected under data protection laws. So make
Mm.
sure if you're doing anything on the cloud that adequate data protection laws are in place to protect your data.
Great. What systems do you recommend to help practices be more efficient?
Well, I think a lot of practices over lockdown did a lot of this for themselves by
Mm.
looking at now using technology to help them in various ways. But from a more sort of technical level, don't underestimate the inefficiency that is caused by slow or unreliable computers. And I find it's
Mm.
very easy for the sort of clinic owner that doesn't maybe have the sort of hands-on involvement to not really consider it. But if you've got a
Mm.
computer where every task is taking a receptionist or a practitioner, 2 or 3 minutes to do, that time, that wasted efficiency adds up very quickly over
Mm.
time.
Yeah.
Computers have a life, and really clinics need to budget that at some point we've got to replace that computer to
Yeah.
keep it running efficiently.
It's amazing when you do have a computer that is takes ages to start up, and then it like freezes, and it's just so frustrating, and you get to the end of the day and you're just like, oh, and eventually you like kind of bite the bullet and buy the new computer, and it just is so whizzy, and you're just thinking, oh my gosh, why didn't I do this 6 months ago?
Absolutely, or
Yeah.
even sometimes not even a new computer is needed. I was working on a
Yeah.
customer's computer remotely yesterday to resolve an email issue, and it was so slow. And when I
Mm.
checked, the cause of it is they were running some software to view their CCTV cameras, and that software was just dragging down the whole performance of the
Mm.
computer. So it's
Yeah.
sometimes not that the computer itself needs replacing, but there may be an underlying cause, and that comes back to maybe malware or so forth, that is
Mm.
just causing that inefficiency.
Yeah. Hmm. How do you prevent emails from going into spam? So I've one of my clients and I have had a frustrating few weeks where suddenly I just started getting notifications from him from every time I sent him an email, and from various different multiple addresses. I'd get a, this hasn't been delivered, your email looks like spam.
Okay. Now,
Mm.
from an end user point of view, there is often very little you can do on your own about this, unfortunately.
Mm.
Yes, if you're using something like Microsoft Outlook, you can say, oh, always trust this sender. But often the anti-spamming rules will sort of transcend that choice and say, no,
Mm.
no, I'm not happy with that. It's going into your junk folder. Because email systems over the years have constantly evolved and still do so to try and reduce the amount of spam emails that end up in your inbox. So the email providers are always changing the algorithms to
Mm.
determine whether an email is spam or not. and they employ more and more techniques to try and work out, is this email genuine? And really, they're doing it to protect us. But
Mm.
when it's a genuine email and it's adamant that it's spam, it just becomes perishing frustrating. So
Yep.
really, the starting point is to first of all test, is it just this one person's address that you're having
Mm.
problems with? Are you able to get most other addresses fine? And you gave me
Mm.
that example just now, Celia, that one particular client, it's always going
Mm.
into spam. So they need to contact their email provider and ask them to try and do some investigations as to why it's been could be generating a
Mm.
sort of a level of spam threshold that means that when you receive it, you're handling it in that way. You need to also
Yeah.
contact your email provider and say, okay, why is this happening? Now,
Yeah.
for businesses and clinics that use things like Microsoft Office 365 and their emails are hosted there, if you've got access yourself to that platform, then a lot of this can be done yourselves. Likewise, if you've got access to your email hosting platforms directly, again, this
Mm.
can be done without necessarily involving the email hosting company directly, at least
Mm.
in the initial stages. And there are various
Yeah.
tools out there that can help sort of troubleshoot this. And again,
Okay.
as a company, we get involved a lot with why my emails going into spam, and it's a bit of a sort of Sherlock Holmes process to sort of track down the ultimate cause.
Yeah.
And sometimes a single little change on a server somewhere is enough to sort it.
Okay. Well, my client has since this happened, he has been investigating on his side, and we've been testing, and some of my emails have now gone through, and we've kind of got to the bottom that my signature block on one of my email addresses, that was the only email that didn't go through. So if I take the signature block off, the email ends up in these things. So I guess I might just be in touch with Kellyquicks. I know you deal with Kellyquicks, and so they look after all my emails for me. So I might be in touch with him as well and just say, what else can I do?
Yeah, and again, we can also look into that for you, of course. So
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
problem. But the interesting point there that you've raised is you found that it was your email signature or graphics. So the other thing
Yeah.
as a good test is if emails from somebody are always going into your spam or junk folder,
Mm.
ask them, and those emails have got graphics in them and all the rest of it, ask them to try without those,
Yeah.
because then that narrows down the likely cause of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually had that with another client who's got quite a really big signature kind of thing at the bottom of his email, and every time it just wouldn't come through. Like I'd got one before, and then suddenly he just said, your email address keeps on bouncing," and when we took off the signature, it worked.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah. How often should hardware and software be upgraded?
More often than most people would like to do,
Yeah.
certainly, which is fair enough. I think certainly you should aim to budget for about a lifespan of 5 years. And certainly when Technology
Mm.
Tamed, when I specify computers for people, that's what I base it on, a 5 year
Mm.
lifespan. That's for hardware.
Mm-hmm.
Software often lasts longer than that. So you might find that you get to 5 years and your computer's gone really slow. Your software is absolutely fine. Not always the
Mm.
case, and bear in mind that even software does have a lifespan. So I'm still coming across customers' computers that are running Windows 7. Well, that was retired about 3 years ago.
Mm.
So nobody should be using that. There's no security updates being produced for that, and
Mm.
third parties are no longer producing compatible software and drivers for hardware.
Yeah.
So nobody should still be using that. Microsoft Office, the Office 2010 has now been retired, and certainly 2007. And again, I still come
Mm.
across customers' machines that are running that software that has been long since retired. So
Mm.
generally 5 years. As I say, software, certainly Microsoft software, tends to have a sort of 10-year lifespan.
Right.
So
Okay.
work on that basis. Now, one thing I
Yeah.
would say is that a lot of computers now have what I call an SSD drive, a solid state disk. So traditional computers had a mechanical hard drive, and that was the single most uh, component that could slow down the performance of a computer and make the
Mhm.
computer feel that over time it's getting slower and slower and slower and slower. Now with solid state drives, I'm seeing that actually you can get away with keeping your computers longer because these drives aren't mechanical, they don't wear out, they don't generate heat, they're not prone to being dropped or anything, so they don't get
Mhm.
damaged. So if somebody is looking at buying a new computer, I always recommend looking for one that's got this, what we call an SSD, a solid state disk, because
Okay.
not only will you benefit from a computer instantly that is so much faster, but also chances are you can keep that machine for maybe 6, 7, or even 8 years.
Wow. Okay. Are they more expensive or
Um, no is the simple answer.
no? Okay. Yeah.
A lot of computers now are now fitted those as standard. It's only when
Mm.
you look for computers that need a big amount of storage. So computers, for example, that have got a 1 terabyte hard disk, those will still be mechanical drives because a 1 terabyte SSD is quite expensive still. But
Mm.
the reality is, certainly when I'm in discussions with businesses about computers, rarely does a business computer need that sort of storage. Home
Yeah.
computers, if you're doing a lot of things like videos and photography, you might need something of that ilk. But
Mm.
most businesses now, they can get away with half of that capacity.
Yeah. And what maintenance should be done regularly?
So certainly making sure that your system is scanned regularly for viruses, certainly
Mhm.
once a week is a good idea. Um, checking that any unwanted software is correct on your computer. It's so easy now. You go to a website, and before you know it, in the background, it's suddenly installed a different search engine for your web browsers.
Mm.
It's installed some sort of freebie McAfee product or some other free antivirus, even though you've got your paid product running. And incidentally, on a computer, you don't want more than one antivirus product running at the same time because they will knock heads. You know, I
Mm.
came across a computer recently and they were complaining because it was very slow. And when I checked, they were running 3 antivirus products
Oh
simultaneously.
gosh. Yeah.
So removing
Wow.
2 of them transformed the performance. So making
Yeah.
sure that you can go into, on a Windows computer, you can go into settings and then apps or control panel programs and features, list the applications, sort it by the install date, and just check for the most recent ones to see whether anything you weren't expecting has ended up creeping onto the
Yeah.
computer. So certainly
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Periodically doing a disk cleanup, which is quite easy to on Windows computers, and also checking for Windows updates, or in the case of Mac updates, and making sure that those are installed.
Mm. Okay. Great. And so, what would be the one thing you'd advise practitioners to do regarding their IT infrastructure?
Okay. Get professional support in place and don't rely on favours from patients, family members, or friends. So many times we're trying to help a clinic with a problem that turns out not to be a healthy practice, and they are waiting for a friend of the clinic owner who's got a full-time job to be able to pop in and look at an issue
Mm.
which is actually affecting the efficiency of the clinic. So
Yeah.
don't rely on favours because you cannot predict when you're going to have a computer issue. That's the nature of
Yeah.
them. So when you have a
Yeah.
computer issue at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, you don't want to find that your mate who looks after your IT is actually, on a cruise somewhere
At
in
the
the
pub.
Seychelles or at the
Yeah.
pub. You need something in place. These are
Yeah.
business systems. You need business level
Mm.
support.
Yeah. And what would you recommend regarding password management and protection? So we've mentioned about removing ex-employees and even changing passwords and things of systems that they can access online. But what else would you recommend regarding password management and protection?
Well, as you all know, nowadays you've got to have passwords for literally everything. So you need to put them down somewhere, and you need to make sure that you've got access to wherever you put them. So you can use facilities that are available online. So for example, there's a product called LastPass, which is cloud-based, and you can use that to securely store all your various system passwords, computer passwords, and so forth. But other than that, you can just store them in a file that you can store locally, as long as that file itself can be password protected. So, for example, Microsoft Excel, you can password protect an Excel spreadsheet. So you could keep an Excel spreadsheet with all your various passwords and keep that password protected. Excuse me one moment.
Okay, that's all right. I think I only have one last question that was put forward also from one of our master members was,
just before we move on from there.
Yeah.
Many times I see in a clinic or in a business, when I ask for a password, maybe I'm setting up a new computer, I need their email account password, they reach for a book.
Yes.
Now, that is fine as long as that book is kept somewhere secure. And often it isn't. Often it's sitting out there on reception.
On the table.
On the table. So if you're going to use a book, no problem at all with that. My advice is to keep it always locked away somewhere. And also, if you're going to keep a book, make sure that you write clearly what the password is. So many times I'm presented with a book of passwords and they're not quite sure whether that's their email account password, whether that's the password for the web address for logging onto their email, and so on and so forth. So put a little description of what that password's for. That'd be great.
Yeah. So final question, what advice can you give regarding taking online payments?
So that's partly going to depend on what the clinic already has in terms of clinic management software, because obviously a lot of those you can take online payments through them. So a lot of clinics now want patients to be able to book online, and at the time of booking take online payments, so that the patient doesn't have to handle your payment card machine when they actually arrive at the clinic. So certainly that's probably the first starting point, is if you're already using a cloud-based CRM system or even a local one, check whether online payments is an option there and what's involved in getting that set up. Be aware that their systems may be related or linked to a specific card acquisition company. So you might have, I don't know, a Streamline payment machine in your clinic, but online you're going to have to use another company like Payment Sense or somebody else, or Stripe, because it's unusual for a CRM system or clinic management system to be able to say we can link with any system, because there has to be software somewhere to bring those two together. So check there as a starting point. Even if you don't do that, there's nothing to stop you integrating online payments in your own website. So if a patient needs to pay, you can direct them to a link on your website and they can make payment through there. So talk to the company that maintains and develops your website about incorporating online payments.
Brilliant. I think that we have covered an awful lot regarding GDPR and IT. And thank you so much for your very, very, very valuable information. I'm sure that it's going to be really well received from our audience. And so I really thank you for coming and joining me this morning and having a chat about all IT.
No, you're very welcome, Celia. Always nice to have a chat with you.
So Glenn, how do my audience get in touch with you to get support from either around GDPR or around general IT?
Okay, so the best way to get in touch is either by email, and if they email support@technologytamed.com, so that's technology and then TAM for mother ed.com, or they can call me directly on my mobile 07970 953 573.
Brilliant. What I'll do is I'll get Melissa to put a slide with your contact details on at the end of this interview so that they could have all of those details and get in touch. And we'll also provide a link for anyone that wants to buy a GDPR toolkit. If you haven't gone through the GDPR toolkit already, highly recommend that you do get that you can then use that for your annual review. And if you have got the GDPR toolkit already, we highly recommend that you take out that GDPR toolkit and just review and make sure that you are still all up to date, because it is still very, very relevant. So thank you very much for listening to this interview. And Glenn, thank you for joining me. And I will look forward to speaking with you soon for either my IT issues or to help out my clients.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Celia.
Wishing you a wonderful weekend, and I will speak with you soon.